Chioma's designer nails dug into Adana's scalp as she dragged her niece toward the exit, shouting, "Beggar, parasite," for the entire restaurant to hear. Adana's pleas meant nothing until a man in a $10,000 suit blocked the door. "You have 5 seconds to release her," Obina said, his eyes deadly calm, "before you learn what happens when you hurt a billionaire's daughter." Chioma's world was about to collapse. What you're about to witness isn't just a story about karma. It's about a girl who survived 17 years of abuse, only to discover her real father was searching for her the entire time. If you've ever been called worthless by family, if you've ever felt invisible in your own home, this story will hit different. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because stories like this, stories about the underdog finally winning, don't come around every day. Drop a comment right now telling me, have you ever been humiliated by someone who was supposed to protect you? Now let's get into what happened when Aunt Chioma made the biggest mistake of her life. The Rosewood Grill sat in the heart of Buckhead, Atlanta's wealthiest neighborhood, where a single appetizer could cost more than Adana made in a month doing odd jobs around Chioma's house. The 17-year-old sat rigid in her chair, wearing a donated dress 2 sizes too big, her natural hair pulled back in a simple ponytail because Chioma never bought her proper hair products. Across from her, Aunt Chioma dripped in designer labels, a cream Gucci blouse, gold jewelry that caught the soft lighting, nails freshly done in a French manicure that probably cost $80. Beside Chioma sat Nkechi, her 19-year-old daughter, scrolling through her iPhone with the bored expression of someone who'd eaten at places like this 100 times. Adana's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the menu, her eyes widening at the prices. $45 for a steak, $30 for pasta. She didn't belong here, and everyone at the table knew it, especially Chioma, who was smiling in that particular way that made Adana's stomach twist with dread. "Order whatever you want, Adana," Chioma said loudly, making sure nearby tables could hear her generosity. "After all, it's your graduation day. You finally finished high school." The way she said it made it sound like an accomplishment on par with learning to tie your shoes. Nkechi snickered into her phone, not even bothering to look up. Adana had graduated 3rd in her class, despite missing 83 days of school over 4 years because Chioma kept her home to clean, cook, and watch Nkechi's younger siblings, despite studying by flashlight in the unfinished basement where she slept on a mattress on the concrete floor. Despite never having a computer of her own, relying on the library's ancient desktops to complete assignments. But Chioma acted like Adana had barely scraped by, like the diploma was charity rather than something earned through blood, sweat, and silent tears. The waiter approached, a young brother named Karede, who looked at Adana with something like pity before taking their drink orders. Chioma ordered an expensive wine. Nkechi wanted a specialty cocktail. Adana asked for water, and Chioma's smile tightened just slightly at the corners. The meal proceeded exactly as Adana feared it would. Chioma ordered the most expensive items on the menu: lobster tail, Wagyu beef, sides that came in tiny portions on oversized plates. Nkechi followed her mother's lead, adding a shrimp cocktail and crab cakes as appetizers. When the waiter turned to Adana, she ordered the cheapest pasta dish, her voice barely above a whisper. "Speak up," Chioma snapped. "Nobody can hear you mumbling like that. This is why you'll never amount to anything. Can't even order food properly." Several diners glanced over at the commotion. Adana repeated her order, louder this time, her cheeks burning with shame. Throughout the meal, Chioma kept up a running commentary on everything Adana did wrong. The way she held her fork, the way she chewed, the way she sat. "Sit up straight, you look like a hunchback." "Don't gulp your water like a pig." Wipe your mouth, you have sauce on your face like a toddler. Nkechi contributed her own jabs between bites of $60 lobster. At least try to act like you've been somewhere before, Adana. You're embarrassing us. The irony wasn't lost on Adana. She was embarrassing them by existing, by being poor, by not magically knowing the etiquette of a world she'd never been allowed to be part of. What Adana didn't know was that 3 tables away, a man sat alone with an untouched plate of food in front of him, watching everything with growing fury. Obinna Okafor had made his first million by 30, built a tech empire by 40, and now at 45, his wealth was measured in billions with a B. He wore his success quietly, a perfectly tailored navy suit, a watch that cost more than most cars, the kind of calm confidence that came from knowing you could buy this entire restaurant before dessert arrived. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, he was watching his daughter be verbally destroyed by the woman who'd stolen 17 years of her life, and it took every ounce of his self-control not to intervene immediately. He'd been following Kioma for 6 weeks, documenting how she treated Adana, building an ironclad case for custody. His private investigator Jelani had captured hours of footage. Adana doing yard work in the freezing cold, while Nkechi watched television inside. Adana carrying groceries up 3 flights of stairs while Kioma sat in the car scrolling through her phone. Adana eating dinner alone in the kitchen after serving the family in the dining room. The evidence was damning, but Obinna's lawyers had advised patience. 1 more week, they'd said. Make sure we have everything we need. But watching this unfold in real time, Obinna realized some things mattered more than legal strategy. The bill arrived in a leather folder that the waiter placed delicately beside Kioma's wine glass. She didn't even glance at it, continuing her story about Nkechi's upcoming trip to Dubai, a graduation present for finishing her first year of community college. 2 weeks, all expenses paid, Chioma bragged to no one in particular. Private villa, personal driver, my daughter deserves the best. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, she pushed the bill across the table to Adana. Oh, I forgot my wallet in the car, she said with theatrical surprise. Adana, be a dear and take care of this. After all, you invited us out to celebrate. The statement was such an obvious lie that even Nkechi looked up from her phone with barely concealed glee. Adana felt her throat close up. She hadn't invited anyone anywhere. Kioma had announced this morning that they were going out, ordered Adana into the car, and driven here. Adana hadn't chosen this restaurant, hadn't suggested celebrating, hadn't wanted any of this. With shaking hands, she opened the leather folder and saw the total, $247.38. Her entire life savings sat in her pocket, a crumpled $20 bill she'd earned cleaning Mrs. Afolabi's house, 3 doors down. Auntie, I don't have... Adana started, but Kioma's hand slammed on the table hard enough to make the wine glasses tremble. Don't you dare embarrass me, she hissed, her voice rising with each word. You brought us to this expensive restaurant, ordered all this food, and now you're telling me you can't pay? What kind of scam are you trying to pull? Diners were openly staring now. The waiter, Korede, hovered nearby, unsure whether to intervene. Adana's eyes filled with tears as she pulled out her single $20 bill and placed it on the table. It sat there, pathetic and insufficient, next to a bill that was 12 times larger. Kioma stared at it like Adana had just spit on the table. $20? She said loudly, making sure the entire restaurant could hear. You drag us to Rosewood Grill and you have $20? Are you insane? Are you stupid? Nkechi was recording now, her phone pointed directly at Adana's face, capturing every moment of her humiliation for social media. This is crazy, Nkechi laughed. Wait until I post this. My broke cousin thought she could stunt at Rosewood. The caption was already forming, the mockery already spreading in Nkichi's mind to her thousands of followers. That's when Kioma stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. In one swift motion, she reached across the table and grabbed a fistful of Adana's braids, yanking her out of her seat with such force that Adana's hip slammed into the table edge. "You want to make a fool of me?" Kioma screamed, dragging Adana away from the table. "You gold-digging little beggar! You think you can eat like you matter? Like you're somebody?" Adana's hands flew to her head, trying to ease the pressure on her scalp as Kioma pulled her across the restaurant floor. Her knees hit the ground once, twice, but Kioma didn't slow down, didn't care that her niece was being dragged like garbage toward the exit. Other diners gasped. A woman covered her child's eyes. Phones came out from every direction, recording the assault in high definition. The restaurant manager, a thin man named Chukwudi, rushed over with his hands up in a placating gesture. "Ma'am, please, we can work this out." But Kioma shoved him aside with her free hand, not even breaking stride. "Stay out of family business, Gade," she shouted. Adana was crying now, begging through sobs. "Please, Auntie, please stop. I'm sorry, please." But sorry had never been enough. Sorry had never stopped the beatings, the starvation, the nights locked in the basement. Sorry was just a word Kioma had trained her to say. Kioma was 10 feet from the exit when a wall appeared in front of her. Except it wasn't a wall, it was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, positioned directly in her path with the immovable presence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. Obinna Okafor stood there in his navy suit, his expression carved from stone, his eyes locked on the hand twisted in Adana's hair. "You have 5 seconds to release her," he said quietly. His voice didn't need volume to carry authority. The entire restaurant had gone silent, everyone frozen in place, watching this confrontation unfold. Kioma blinked up at him, momentarily thrown off her rhythm. "Excuse me?" she said, trying to inject indignation into her voice. "This is a family matter. Move." She tried to step around him, but he shifted, blocking her path again with minimal effort. 4 seconds, Obinna said, and something in his tone made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. Kioma's grip on Adana's hair loosened slightly as she registered that this man wasn't going to be intimidated or dismissed. "Who do you think you are?" she demanded, but her voice had lost some of its earlier venom. Now she just sounded uncertain, like someone realizing they'd walked into a situation they didn't understand. 3 seconds, Obinna continued as if she hadn't spoken. Then he delivered the words that would change everything. "Before you learn what happens when you hurt a billionaire's daughter." The statement hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Kioma's hand released Adana's hair immediately, her face going through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, nervous laughter. "Daughter," she repeated, the word coming out strangled. "This girl—" "Sir, I think you're confused. This is my niece, Adana. Her mother was my sister Yetunde, who died 17 years ago. This girl doesn't have a father. He abandoned them before she was even born." She said it with such confidence, such certainty, because that's the lie she'd told for nearly 2 decades, the lie she'd built her entire guardianship on. Adana had collapsed on the floor, still crying, her hands pressed to her scalp where Kioma's nails had drawn tiny spots of blood. She didn't understand what was happening, couldn't process why this stranger was defending her, couldn't comprehend the words he'd just spoken. Daughter? His daughter? Nothing made sense. Obinna's jaw tightened at Kioma's words, but when he spoke, his voice remained deadly calm. "Her name is Adana Okafor," he said, and hearing her full name spoken aloud for the first time in her life made Adana's head snap up. "She is my daughter, and I know exactly who her mother was. Yetunde Nwosu, the woman I loved, the woman I was going to marry, the woman your family convinced to run away from me because you told her I would abandon her." He took a step forward and Kioma took a step back, her face draining of color. "I know what you did. I know you promised Yetunde on her deathbed that you would tell me about my daughter. And I know you never did. I know you've been cashing survivor benefit checks meant for Adana for 17 years. I know you make her sleep in your unfinished basement. I know you beat her, starve her, work her like a servant. I know everything, Kioma, and I've been documenting it for 6 weeks." He pulled his phone from his pocket and turned it so she could see the screen. Video footage of Adana scrubbing floors, of Adana eating scraps in the kitchen, of Kioma screaming in her face, time-stamped, dated, undeniable. The blood drained from Kioma's face so completely she looked like she might faint. I was taking care of her," she stammered, backing up until she bumped into a table. "I took her in when nobody else would. I fed her, clothed her, gave her a roof." "You exploited a child," Obinna cut her off. "You stole from her, you abused her, and today, in front of 40 witnesses, you committed assault." He turned to the restaurant manager who stood nearby, still clutching his tablet. "Chukwudi, charge this entire meal to my account and call the police." The manager nodded immediately, already pulling out his phone. Kioma's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Police? For what? I was disciplining my niece. I have the right—" "You have no rights over her," Obinna said flatly. "You never legally adopted her. You're just a relative who took custody informally, and that ends today." Nkechi had stopped recording, her face pale as she watched her mother's world crumble. She tried to edge toward the door, but a large man in a black suit, Obinna's bodyguard Taiwo, appeared seemingly from nowhere, blocking the exit with crossed arms. The police arrived in less than 6 minutes, which said something about the neighborhood and the restaurant's clientele. Officer Bukola stepped through the door first, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who'd worked Buckhead for 12 years, and recognized Obinna immediately. "Mr. Okafor?" she said with a respectful nod before her eyes swept the scene. The crying girl on the floor, the panicking woman backed against a table, the phones still recording from every angle. "What happened here?" Obinna gestured to Chukwudi. "Your manager has security footage. But the short version is that woman assaulted this child in front of the entire restaurant." Kioma found her voice, desperation making it shrill. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding. This is my niece. I was just trying to teach her responsibility. She can't go around ordering expensive food she can't afford. I was correcting her behavior." But Officer Bukola was already watching the footage on Chukwudi's tablet, her expression growing harder with each second. The video showed everything in brutal clarity. Kioma grabbing Adana's hair, yanking her from the chair, dragging her across the floor while the girl begged and cried. There was no ambiguity here, no gray area. This was assault, caught in 4 different camera angles. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back," Officer Bukola said, pulling handcuffs from her belt. Kioma's eyes went wide with genuine fear. "You're arresting me for disciplining my own family." "I'm arresting you for assault and battery of a minor," Officer Bukola corrected, snapping the cuffs onto Kioma's wrists with practiced efficiency. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the Miranda rights continued, Nkechi started crying, her phone forgotten in her hand. "Mama, what do I do? Mama!" But Kioma wasn't looking at her daughter. She was staring at Adana with pure hatred burning in her eyes. All pretense of family love burned away. "You set this up," she hissed as Officer Bukola led her toward the door. "You conniving little witch!" You knew he was here. You planned this whole thing." Adana just stared back, still on the floor, still unable to fully process what was happening. She'd been called a lot of things in 17 years: burden, worthless, stupid, ugly, ungrateful, but never conniving. She'd never had the power to plan anything. "Ma'am, stop talking," Officer Bukola said firmly, guiding Kioma out the door and toward the waiting patrol car. A second officer led Nkechi out for questioning, though she wasn't being arrested yet. The restaurant slowly came back to life, diners whispering to each other, the waitstaff trying to resume normal service despite the chaos that had just unfolded. Obinna knelt down beside Adana, moving slowly like someone approaching a wounded animal. "Adana," he said softly, "can you look at me?" She couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, tears still streaming down her face, her whole body shaking. This man said he was her father, the person Kioma had told her didn't want her, had never wanted her, had walked away before she was born. But he was here. He'd been watching. He knew her name. "I know this is overwhelming," Obinna continued, his voice gentle. "I know you're scared and confused, but I need you to trust me right now. We need to get you checked out by a doctor, make sure you're not seriously hurt. Then we're going to talk. I'm going to explain everything. But first, can you let me help you up?" Adana finally looked at him, really looked at him, and saw tears in his eyes. This stranger with the expensive suit and the quiet power was crying. For her, because of her. She let him help her to her feet, though her legs felt like water. Taiwo, the bodyguard, had already brought the car around. A black Mercedes SUV with tinted windows. Obinna guided Adana to it with a gentle hand on her shoulder, never grabbing, never forcing, always asking permission. "Is this okay? Can I help you in?" At the hospital, Dr. Folake examined Adana with the kind of thoroughness that made it clear she'd seen cases like this before. She documented everything. The small bald patches in Adana's scalp from years of hair pulling, the old scars on her back from being hit with extension cords, the healed fracture in her left wrist that had never been properly set, the signs of chronic malnutrition. She was 17 but weighed 98 pounds, nearly 30 pounds underweight. Dr. Folake's expression grew grimmer with each finding she added to the chart. When she stepped out to speak with Obinna, her voice was tight with controlled anger. "This child has been systematically abused for years. Multiple old injuries, signs of long-term physical and emotional trauma. I'm required by law to report this to Child Protective Services." "Already done," Obinna said. "They're meeting us here." Social worker Nena arrived 40 minutes later, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a manila folder thick with paperwork. She sat down with Adana in a private room, just the two of them, and spoke in a gentle voice that made Adana want to both trust her and run away. "Adana, I need to ask you some questions about your home life with Kioma. I know this is hard, but I need you to be honest with me. Can you do that?" Adana nodded, but her hands were clenched so tight in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Nena went through the questions systematically. "Where did you sleep?" "The basement." "On what?" "A mattress on the floor. Was there heat down there?" "No." "What did you eat?" "Whatever was left after the family finished." "When did you eat?" "After I cleaned up their dinner." "Did Kioma ever hit you?" "Yes." "How often?" "When I did something wrong." "What counted as wrong?" "Everything." "Did you go to school regularly?" "When she let me." "Why wouldn't she let you?" "She needed me to watch the younger kids, or clean, or cook." Each answer was delivered in a monotone, like Adana was reading from a script. This was her normal. She didn't even realize how bad it sounded until she saw Nena writing furiously, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Adana," Nena said carefully, setting down her pen, Do you want to go back to Kioma's house? The question was so absurd that Adana almost laughed. Want to go back? Want to return to the basement, the beatings, the constant reminders that she was a burden, a charity case, someone who should be grateful for scraps. But then fear clamped down on her throat, because what if saying no made things worse? What if they sent her somewhere even worse? She'll hurt me if I go back, Adana whispered. She always hurts me worse when I make her look bad in public. And today, this made her look really bad. Nena reached across the table and placed her hand gently over Adana's. Listen to me very carefully. You are never going back there. Ever. Mr. Okafor has petitioned for emergency custody, and given what I've seen today, what the doctors have documented, what the police witnessed, I'm recommending immediate removal from Kioma's care. You understand what I'm saying? You're never going back to that house. Adana's face crumpled and she sobbed in a way she'd never let herself sob in Kioma's house, where crying was punished as weakness, as manipulation, as one more thing she was doing wrong. The emergency custody hearing happened the next morning in a courthouse in downtown Atlanta. Judge Amati presiding, a distinguished man in his 60s who'd been on the bench for 23 years and had seen every kind of custody case imaginable. Kioma sat at the defendant's table with a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Her hair was disheveled, her designer clothes from yesterday wrinkled from sleeping in them at the county jail. Nkechi sat in the gallery, crying quietly, her phone confiscated. Obina's legal team was led by Chidi, a shark of a lawyer who wore a three-piece suit and had a reputation for never losing. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Your Honor, we're seeking immediate and permanent custody of Adana Okafor on behalf of her biological father, Obina Okafor. We have DNA evidence confirming paternity, documentation of 17 years of child abuse by the current guardian Chioma Nwosu, and testimony from medical professionals, social workers, and law enforcement. He laid it out like a prosecutor building a murder case. The medical records showing healed fractures, malnutrition, evidence of repeated physical abuse, bank statements proving that Kioma had been cashing survivor benefit checks, meant for Adana $47,000 over 17 years, and spending them on herself and Nkechi. School records showing Adana had missed 83 days of school, always with notes from Kioma claiming illness, though Adana was never taken to a doctor. Character witnesses from neighbors who'd seen Adana working in the yard in freezing temperatures while Kioma and Nkechi stayed warm inside. The restaurant surveillance footage played on the courtroom screen, showing the assault in brutal detail. Kioma's public defender tried to mount a defense, but what could he say? Your Honor, my client acknowledges that her methods may have been unorthodox, but she took this child in when no one else would. She fed her, clothed her, kept a roof over her head for 17 years. That has to count for something. Kioma nodded vigorously from her seat. I did my best, she called out, ignoring her lawyer's attempt to shush her. I took her in. I sacrificed for her. She owes me everything. Every single thing she has is because I gave it to her. Judge Amati looked at her over his glasses with an expression that could freeze lava. Ms. Nwosu, what exactly did you give her? A mattress on a concrete floor, the privilege of eating your leftovers, the honor of being beaten when she displeased you. Or perhaps you're referring to the $47,000 in survivor benefits you stole, money that was meant to provide for her education, her health care, her basic needs. Kioma's mouth opened and closed. That money was for household expenses. She lived in my house, ate my food. You just said she ate leftovers. Judge Amati interrupted coldly. Which is it, Ms. Nwosu? Was she family you cared for, or was she free labor you exploited? Silence. The DNA results were presented next. clinical and undeniable. 99.9% probability that Obina Okafor was Adana's biological father. Kioma stared at the document like it was written in a foreign language. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered. "Yatunde said he didn't want the baby. She said he left her." Obina stood up from his seat, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "I never left her. Your family convinced her I would leave her, so she ran. And when she died, you promised her you would tell me about my daughter. You looked a dying woman in the eyes and promised, and then you stole 17 years from me. 17 years I could have raised my daughter, loved her, given her the life she deserved. You stole that from both of us." Kioma lunged toward him, her public defender barely catching her arm. "You don't deserve her. You weren't there. I was. Me. I raised her. You tortured her," Obina shot back. Judge Amadi's gavel came down like a gunshot. "Order. Ms. Nwosu, sit down immediately or you'll be held in contempt." Kioma sat, but her face was twisted with rage and something else, genuine disbelief that she was the villain in this story. Judge Amadi reviewed the documents in front of him, though everyone in the courtroom knew the decision was already made. "I've seen a lot of custody cases," he said finally. "Cases where good people make mistakes, where loving parents struggle with circumstances beyond their control. This is not one of those cases. Ms. Nwosu, you systematically exploited, abused, and defrauded a child in your care. You stole money meant for her benefit. You denied her adequate food, shelter, and medical care. And when you were caught, your only defense is that she should be grateful you didn't do worse. I'm granting full legal and physical custody of Adana Okafor to her biological father, Obina Okafor, effective immediately. Additionally, I'm referring this case to the District Attorney for criminal prosecution on charges of child abuse, theft, and fraud. Bailiff, please escort Ms. Nwosu back to holding." Kioma screamed as the bailiff approached. Not words, just a sound of pure rage and disbelief. Nkechi stood up in the gallery, crying, "What about me? What am I supposed to do?" But nobody answered her. Her mother was being led away in handcuffs, and Adana was leaving with a father she'd just met, and Nkechi was suddenly very alone. Obina's home in Buckhead was the kind of place Adana had only seen in movies. The kind with a circular driveway, a fountain out front, columns framing the entrance. The kind where the word house seemed inadequate. This was an estate. Taiwo pulled the Mercedes up to the front door, and Obina helped Adana out, moving slowly, letting her set the pace. Inside, the foyer alone was bigger than Kioma's living room. Marble floors reflected the light from a crystal chandelier that must have cost more than a car. A curved staircase led to the second floor where Adana could see a hallway lined with doors. "This is too much," Adana whispered, frozen in place. "I can't. Where do I sleep? The basement, the garage? Just tell me where you want me and I'll stay out of the way." The words came out automatically, the survival script she'd learned over 17 years. "Make yourself small. Don't take up space. Don't be a burden." Obina's face crumpled with grief. "Adana, this is your home, your whole home. You don't stay out of the way. You live here." He gestured for her to follow him up the stairs, and after a moment's hesitation, she did. The second floor had 6 bedrooms, but he led her to the end of the hall and opened double doors into a space that made Adana's breath catch. The bedroom was huge, painted in soft blues and whites, with a massive bed covered in pillows, a sitting area with a couch and television, and windows overlooking a garden. But what made Adana's knees go weak was the attached bathroom, a full bathroom, with a bathtub and a separate shower and a counter with more space than she'd ever had for anything in her life. "This is yours," Obina said simply. "All of it. Your bedroom, your bathroom, this whole wing of the house is yours. I'll show you the rest. There's a library downstairs, a pool out back, a home gym if you ever want to use it, but this space is completely yours." Adana stood in the middle of the room, turning in slow circles, unable to process what he was saying. Her own room, her own bathroom, her own space that nobody could take away, that she wouldn't have to share, that she wouldn't be punished for using. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice breaking. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. I could be terrible. I could be everything Aunt Kioma said I was, lazy, stupid, worthless. Why would you want me?" Obinna sat down on the edge of the bed and patted the space next to him. When Adana sat, leaving careful distance between them, he pulled out his phone and opened his photo gallery. The first picture was of a young woman, maybe 25, with the same dark eyes as Adana, the same wide smile. She was laughing at the camera, her hair in long braids, wearing a white sundress. "Your mother," Obinna said softly. "Yetunde." This was taken a week before she disappeared. She'd just found out she was pregnant with you. He swiped to the next photo, the two of them together, Obinna younger, less gray in his hair, holding Yetunde close while she held up her hand to show off an engagement ring. "I was going to marry her," he continued. "I loved her more than I'd ever loved anyone. We were planning our whole lives together. Then I had to fly to Dubai for a business meeting. Just 3 days. When I came back, she was gone. Her family said she didn't want to see me, that she'd changed her mind about everything. I hired investigators, spent everything I had trying to find her, but your mother was smart. When she wanted to disappear, she disappeared." He swiped through more photos, screenshots of missing person reports, old emails to various agencies, receipts from private investigators. "I never stopped looking," he said, "even after months turned into years, even after my business took off and people told me to move on. I kept looking because somewhere out there was the woman I loved, and I needed to know she was okay." Then the photos changed. Recent surveillance footage of Kioma's house, Adana carrying heavy grocery bags, Adana scrubbing the driveway, Adana sitting on the back porch eating something from a small bowl, while through the window Kioma and Nkichi sat at a full table. 6 months ago my investigator found her death certificate, found out I had a daughter, found out where you were. His voice cracked. "Found out what was being done to you." "Why didn't you come sooner?" Adana asked, and there was no accusation in her voice, just genuine confusion. Obinna wiped his eyes. "My lawyers said I needed ironclad evidence, that if I just showed up claiming to be your father, Kioma could fight it, drag it out in court for years while you stayed in that house. They said document everything, build a case she can't fight, make sure when we move, we win completely. So that's what I did. And every single day I watched you suffer and didn't stop it. I died a little inside. Then yesterday in that restaurant, when she put her hands on you, I couldn't wait anymore. Some things are more important than legal strategy." He turned to face her fully. "Adana, I know I'm a stranger to you right now. I know 17 years of pain doesn't go away overnight. I'm not asking you to love me or even trust me yet. All I'm asking is that you give me a chance to be the father I should have been all along. Let me prove to you that you're not a burden, that you're not worthless, that you were wanted from the very first moment I knew you existed." Adana burst into tears. Real tears, the kind that came from somewhere deep and wounded, that she'd kept locked away for 17 years. Obinna didn't try to hug her, didn't invade her space. He just sat next to her and let her cry, keeping a box of tissues nearby and waiting until she was ready. The weeks that followed were an education in healing. Obinna hired Dr. Chiamaka, a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma, and Adana met with her 3 times a week. In those sessions, Adana began to understand that her reactions, flinching when people moved quickly, apologizing constantly, hoarding food in her room, Sleeping on the floor instead of the bed weren't character flaws. They were survival mechanisms. Dr. Chiamaka was patient, never pushing, always letting Adana set the pace. They worked on basic things. It's okay to take up space. It's okay to have opinions. It's okay to say no. It's okay to want things. Obina was equally patient at home. When Adana woke up at 5 in the morning and started cleaning the kitchen, he gently told her the housekeeper would handle it. When she tried to serve him dinner before eating herself, he insisted they eat together at the table. When she asked permission to use the bathroom, to turn on the television, to eat something from the refrigerator, he reminded her, "This is your home. You don't need permission to exist here." Slowly, painfully slowly, Adana began to believe him. Shopping was a revelation and a challenge. Obina took her to Lenox Square Mall and told her to pick out clothes. Adana chose one modest dress, the cheapest one she could find, and declared herself done. Obina looked at the single dress, then at her. "Adana, you need more than one dress. You need pants, shirts, shoes, jackets. Winter's coming. You'll need a coat." "I don't want to be greedy," Adana said quietly, staring at the floor. "One is enough." It took Obina a moment to respond, and when he did, his voice was thick with emotion. "Listen to me. Wanting more than one dress doesn't make you greedy. It makes you a normal 17-year-old girl who deserves a wardrobe. You're not taking advantage of me. You're not being a burden. I want to buy you clothes. I want to buy you 50 dresses if that's what you want. Please, let me do this." They left the mall 4 hours later with enough bags to fill the trunk of the Mercedes. Adana was exhausted, but there was something like a smile on her face. She'd picked out jeans, sweaters, a winter coat in dark blue that fit perfectly, shoes that didn't have holes in them, and yes, 3 more dresses, because Obina had insisted and she'd finally let herself want them. School was another challenge. Adana had graduated high school, but her education was full of gaps from all the days she'd missed. Obina hired tutors for math and science, subjects where she'd fallen behind. But in English and history, subjects she'd studied by flashlight in the basement, she was ahead of her grade level. She devoured books like someone starving, and Obina's library became her favorite room in the house. It was there that she met Zainab, the daughter of Obina's business partner, Emeka. Zainab was 18, already in her first year at Spelman College, and she showed up one afternoon when her father came by for a meeting. She found Adana curled up in a leather armchair reading Toni Morrison. "Girl, you have taste," Zainab said, plopping down in the chair across from her. "That book destroyed me in the best way." They talked for 3 hours about books, about life, about nothing and everything. Zainab didn't treat Adana like a charity case or a victim. She just treated her like a person, like a friend. When she left, she hugged Adana and said, "Same time next week, we can start a book club. Just us." It was the first friendship Adana had ever had. The trial date arrived 6 months after the restaurant incident. Adana didn't legally have to testify. There was more than enough evidence to convict Kioma without her victim impact statement. But Dr. Chiamaka and Obina both told her the choice was hers. "Sometimes survivors find power in speaking their truth," Dr. Chiamaka said. "Sometimes they find power in letting the evidence speak for them. Neither choice is wrong. What do you want?" Adana thought about it for 3 days. Then she wrote her statement. On the day of the trial, she wore one of her new dresses, dark green with small flowers, and walked into that courtroom with her head up. Kioma looked smaller somehow, diminished by 6 months in jail and the weight of her crimes. When the judge called Adana to the stand, she walked forward with steady steps. She'd practiced this with Dr. Chiamaka. Breathe, center yourself, speak your truth. She unfolded her statement and read, "For 17 years, you told me I was worthless, that nobody wanted me, that I should be grateful you didn't throw me in the streets. You beat me when I didn't clean fast enough. You starved me when I spoke out of turn. You stole money meant for my education and spent it on your daughter's trips and your own designer clothes. You made me sleep in a basement with no heat and told me I was lucky to have a roof at all. But you know what the worst thing you did was? She looked up from the paper, looked directly at Kioma for the first time. You made me believe my father didn't love me. You stole 17 years we could have had together. You stole my childhood, my sense of safety, my belief that I deserved to exist. And for what? Pride, money, control? I'll never understand it. Adana's voice was steady now, stronger. But I forgive you, not because you deserve it, not because I've forgotten what you did. I forgive you because I deserve peace, because carrying hate for you would be like letting you win, like letting you keep controlling me, even now. So I forgive you and I release you from my life completely. I hope you find whatever it is you were looking for when you hurt me. Because I already found what I needed. A father who never stopped searching, who loved me before he even knew me, who proved that I was wanted all along. The courtroom was silent except for muffled crying from the gallery. Kioma stared at Adana with an unreadable expression. When Adana stepped down from the stand, Obina was waiting, and this time, when he opened his arms, she walked into them without hesitation. Judge Amati sentenced Kioma to 8 years in prison, full restitution of the stolen benefits plus damages totaling over $90,000, and permanent loss of any custody or visitation rights. As the bailiff led her away, Kioma turned back one last time. "I gave you everything," she said, her voice hollow. Adana just shook her head. "No, you gave me nothing, but my father gave me everything, and that's the difference you'll never understand." Nkechi tried to approach Adana in the courthouse hallway afterward. She'd aged in 6 months, lost weight, looked tired in a way designer clothes couldn't hide. "Adana, wait," she called out. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't know she was—" "You knew," Adana interrupted, her voice kind but firm. "You were there, you saw. You just didn't care because it wasn't happening to you. And that's okay. I forgive you too. But forgiveness doesn't mean friendship. It doesn't mean I want you in my life. I hope you figure out who you want to be, Nkechi. I hope you become better than your mother raised you to be, but I can't help you do that." She walked away with Obina, leaving Nkechi standing alone in the hallway, and she didn't look back. Some doors, once closed, needed to stay closed. 2 years later, on Adana's 19th birthday, Obina rented out the Rosewood Grill, the same restaurant where everything had changed. The manager, Chukwudi, remembered them immediately and gave them the best table in the house. Adana wore a traditional Nigerian dress, a stunning iro and buba in deep purple with gold threading that Obina had commissioned from a designer in Lagos. She'd filled out in 2 years, gained healthy weight, let her natural hair grow into a glorious crown of curls. She smiled easily now, laughed often, and moved through the world like someone who knew she belonged in it. The private party included Zainab, who'd become like a sister, Dr. Chiamaka, who'd guided Adana through the hardest parts of healing, Nena, the social worker who'd believed her, Officer Bukola, who'd arrested Kioma that first day, and family, Obina's siblings and cousins who'd welcomed Adana with open arms, who treated her like she'd always been part of them. When dessert arrived, Obina stood to make a toast. The room quieted, everyone turning to listen. 19 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the private dining room. I lost the love of my life. When Yetunde died, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. For 17 years, I searched for the daughter I didn't know existed, and when I finally found her, I discovered she'd survived horrors I couldn't have imagined. But here's what I learned. My daughter is stronger than the trauma she endured. She's kinder than the cruelty she experienced. She's more graceful than the pain she survived. Adana, you are my second chance, my redemption. the proof that love never dies, it just takes different forms. Adana stood up, her own glass raised, tears already streaming down her face, but she was smiling through them. "I spent 17 years believing I was a burden," she said. "A mistake, something unwanted that someone had to tolerate out of obligation. Then you showed me what real love looks like. Not loud love, not performative love, but the kind of love that waits patiently while you learn to trust it. The kind of love that searches for 17 years and never gives up. The kind of love that says, you deserve to exist just by existing yourself." She looked around the room at the faces that had become family. "I was just waiting to be found. And you, all of you, you found me. You taught me that my value doesn't come from how I was treated. It comes from who I am. And who I am is my mother's daughter and my father's daughter. I'm Adana Okafor, and I'm not a burden. I'm not a mistake. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The room erupted in applause. Obinna hugged her tight, and Adana hugged him back without flinching, without fear, with nothing but gratitude and love. The final scene took place 2.5 years after the restaurant confrontation. Adana had just finished her first semester at Columbia University, studying pre-med like her mother had planned to do. She'd also started a nonprofit called the Found Daughters Foundation, helping kids in foster care connect with resources, therapy, and legal advocacy. She used her own story not as a badge of victimhood, but as proof that survival was possible, that healing was possible, that found families could be just as real as biological ones. Obinna had flown to New York to spend winter break with her, and on a crisp December morning, they sat in a small cafe near campus. Adana sipped her coffee. She'd developed a taste for fancy coffee, one of many small pleasures she'd learned to enjoy without guilt. Obinna read the newspaper, occasionally reading aloud articles he thought she'd find interesting. It was comfortable, easy, the kind of ordinary moment that would have been impossible 2 years ago. "You know what's crazy?" Adana said suddenly, setting down her mug. Obinna lowered his paper. "What's that?" "If Aunt Kioma hadn't dragged me through that restaurant, we might never have found each other. You might have spent another 6 months gathering evidence. And in that time, who knows what could have happened? She might have moved. I might have run away. The universe might have pulled us in different directions." She shook her head in wonder. "The worst moment of my life became the best moment of my life. How does that work?" Obinna folded his newspaper carefully, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Some people would call it divine timing," he said finally. "They'd say everything happens for a reason, that God had a plan. But I don't think God wanted you to suffer for 17 years just to teach us a lesson. I think people make choices, bad choices, evil choices sometimes, and we have to live with the consequences. Kioma chose cruelty. She chose exploitation. Those were her choices, not part of some cosmic plan." He reached across the table and took Adana's hand. "But I also believe in redemption. Not for her. She has to find her own redemption if she wants it. But for us, we redeemed those 17 years. We can't get them back, but we can make sure every day forward counts double. That's not divine timing. That's us refusing to let evil have the last word." Adana squeezed his hand, and for a moment they just sat there, father and daughter, in a cafe in New York City, existing in the peace they'd built together. "I don't believe in divine timing either," Adana said softly, "but I believe in you. I believe in people who don't give up, people who search for 17 years, people who stand up in restaurants and say, 'That's my daughter,' even when they haven't seen her since she was born. That's not mystery. That's not fate. That's just love. And love is the only thing that ever really saves anyone." Obinna smiled, his eyes wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. "You sound like your mother. She used to say love was a verb, not a feeling. Something you do, not something you have." Then you've been loving me very loudly, Adana said, returning his smile. And I'm finally learning to love loudly too, to take up space, to believe I deserve the space I take up. That's your gift to me, not the house or the education or the foundation. You gave me permission to exist, and that's everything. They finished their coffee, paid the bill, and walked out into the New York winter together. Obina would fly back to Atlanta tomorrow. Adana would start her second semester next week. Chioma was still in prison with 6 more years to serve. Nkechi had moved to California, trying to build a life separate from her mother's shadow. Dr. Chiamaka had become a permanent part of Adana's support system, sessions now monthly instead of weekly. Zainab was planning to move to New York after graduation to be closer to her best friend, and the Found Daughters Foundation had helped 17 girls in its first year, with plans to expand. Everything had changed. Everything was still changing, but for the first time in her life, Adana wasn't afraid of change. She walked beside her father through the streets of Manhattan, and she was exactly who she was supposed to be: found, loved, whole, a survivor, a daughter, a woman who'd learned that the worst moments could become doorways to the best life, not because suffering was noble, but because she'd refused to let suffering define her. What you just heard wasn't just a story about karma or justice. It was about a girl who survived 17 years of being told she was nothing, only to discover she'd always been everything to the one person who mattered. Adana went from sleeping in a basement to changing lives through her foundation, from being called a beggar to becoming a Columbia student, studying to be a doctor like her mother dreamed, all because one man refused to stop searching for his daughter. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe some things happen exactly when they're supposed to? Do you think Adana would have been found if Chioma hadn't made that mistake in the restaurant? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touched you, if you know someone who needs to hear that their value isn't determined by how they've been treated, hit that like button and share this with them. Subscribe for more stories about real people overcoming impossible odds, because these stories matter. They remind us that we're not alone in our struggles. They prove that endings can be rewritten. Remember this: you're not a burden, you're not worthless, you're not a mistake. You're just waiting to be found by the right people who will show you what you've always been worth. And sometimes the worst moment of your life is just the universe forcing you toward the best moment you haven't lived yet. I'll see you in the next one.